you again and some new people too. I'm Crystal, and I work and farm in ancestral Mohawk land in Johnstown, New York. I'm a regional vegetable specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension. And so corn is actually outside of my wheelhouse. I'm here as much to learn today as anything. Certainly, I'm happy to talk about cover crops too, but I feel more like a student today, which is nice. And the one thing I will offer is if anyone feels shy today and doesn't want to actually ask a question, I will task myself with keeping a close eye on the chat. So if you want me to ask your question, I would be happy to do that.
Thank you. And I am recording this session just so for people who aren't able to join today, but please don't let that make you feel shy either. Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Daniel Hayden. I'm a citizen of the Comanche Nation of Oklahoma. I'm a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Department of Plant Pathology. My work is actually with cover crops and indigenous corn, so I felt like this is the right place to be at. And I'm currently doing research with Leia's co-op and Dan Cornelius also, and seeing how we can better integrate reduced tillage practices with interseeding cover crops with indigenous corn varieties.
Absolutely. So glad to have you on the call, Daniel. Aaron, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Aaron Gabriel. I've been working with Cornell Cooperative Extension since about 1996 as a agronomy educator, working with field crops and soils, and have done some work with composting. I live in Washington County along the Hudson River. Our farm is along the Hudson. I've milked cows and grown a lot of hay, a little bit, probably more sweet corn than field corn that I've grown, but work with growers and do education on corn. Lately, I've been learning about the open pollinated corn, so I'm kind of learning as well.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Greg, do you want to introduce yourself? Uh-oh, he just went dark.
That was promising.
Yeah. Greg, there you go.
I'm in the dark.
Your video went off, so your name went up on the screen, and you couldn't see you anymore.
Oh, that's probably a good thing. You look pretty haggity and scary. So, Greg Black here from the Ho-Chunk Nation. Only I guess last time I told you the only farming I do is kind of culturally for family and ceremonies. I hate to call them ceremonies, but a way of life. And I want to learn more about cover crops because you guys sparked an interest for me. So thank you.
Oh, great. Glad to hear that. Catherine, do you want to go next?
Sure. I am Kat Jocks. I work for Michigan State University Extension. I coordinate our federally recognized tribes extension program here in Anishinaabe lands, and I live and work specifically in Ganoushka or Bay Mills Indian community. I am really coming as a learner. I don't have as much experience as some of my other extension colleagues with cover crops. But in our FERTEP work, I get to support and learn from some tribal farmers that tend to have a focus on mixed vegetable production.
Great. Dan, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dan Cornelius, and Daniel Hayden had mentioned we've done some work together. Daniel's been doing a test plot in one of my fields of looking at some different cover crops, and I've been more, I guess my cover crops have been more of trying to work with the perennial grasses that are there, and I've been trying to really kind of get it figured out of how to do no-till into them. Hopefully it is a bit of a challenge, but I have been growing in straight into reed canary grass for a few years with a walk behind tractor, and it works really well because there's really good soil fertility in those areas, but where there's not as good soil fertility, those perennial grasses really soak up a lot of the nutrients. So trying to do some adjustments on that system for this year, and we'll also be doing it. I'm gonna have to do some more tillage as well, but working on playing around more with some different cover crop mixes. So also here to learn more.
Awesome. Sheree, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Poso Nuiswan Shri Thunder. I am a community organizer with Mini Conakim, and also the farm manager. So yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted people to add?
Only what you're willing to share.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Nayatash, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Nayatash Valdez. I'm from the Shinnecock Nation. We just recently, well, this past fall, planted some cover crops. I'm hoping it grew over the winter, which I don't know. We had a lot of snow. It's been cold. I'm not really familiar with cover crops. I normally just do the community garden. And this year, I hope and we plan to doing a farm. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. And I'm just here to listen and learn. That's all. Thank you.
Great. Jessica?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm sorry I'm late. My name is Jessica Greentear. I'm Ho Chung from Wisconsin. I'm the seed keeper and farm manager at Dream of Wild Health Farms. And then I also own my own micro farm slash farmstead in Hudson, Wisconsin. I'm anxious to learn more about cover crops and see what's working for other folks. I know on my home scale or home life, I'm transitioning lawn into productive growing spaces. So I've been using clover and tillage radish just to help feed some of my corn, but then also to help break up some of the compaction. So excited to hear what's working for folks out there.
Awesome. Diane?
Hi, Diane MacArthur, White Earth Tribal and Community College Extension. We have been growing some corn here at Extension, and now we really want to get into using the cover crop and no-till. And we are using land that was farmland for many years. It's actually just been growing whatever for about the past 10 years. So we definitely need to do some cover cropping to fix the soil and then hopefully to transition to no-till.
Great. David?
Good afternoon, everyone. David Anderson, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, Horticulture Operations Supervisor. We grow very little corn with our program, but we work a lot with our producers. And I'm also a corn grower myself here, and so kind of interested at looking at cover crops as a not only a ground cover, but to help with some of our weed suppression. We have a lot of weed issues in the southern climates with all the rain and humidity we have. So just interested to see what everybody else is doing and to try to learn a little bit.
Awesome. Bill, is that you in the 920 number? Someone's calling in from Oneida. I'm not sure who it is. If it is you, Bill, or whoever it is, we can't hear you, so I'm not sure. Oh, you just went green.
Yeah, Frank Kutka here.
Oh,
on the
hi.
phone.
All right.
So I'm the Sustainable Agriculture faculty at College of Menominee Nation, and I look forward to hearing what folks have to say about this exciting topic.
Awesome. Thanks for joining in. Okay, great. So it sounds like we have some people who have dabbled in cover crops. We have some people who are interested. Daniel has been doing research with our corn co-op and with Dan Cornelius, as he mentioned. And he has some interesting things to share in regards to that. And so I'm going to kick it over to you, Daniel, just talk about what your research has kind of shown. Oh,
Yeah, I have some slides. That's fine.
oh, great. Let me make you the co-host. Here we go.
Right. Sorry, it's taking forever. Sorry, I'm running slow today on the computer. All right. All right, and then let me get that presenter view on. All right. You want to see this? Am I good?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So like Leah said, that's cover crops indigenous corn is basically like what I do now for my research, and so generally the overview of what I'm doing is like working with indigenous growers here in Wisconsin specifically, and then we're people who are strictly interested in like those reduced tillage practices, and then trying to make that transition like either there, like the no-till. And so in this whole sort of scheme, we're sort of linking those practices with, does it increase yield? Does it decrease yield? How the cover crops do? Like, are they accumulating biomass? Are they just, not doing very well? How much weed suppression there is? And also like, is this overall sort of increasing the amount of like soil microbes in the ground as well in these fields? And so sort of overall, how can we improve like, and sustainably improve corn production while interseeding cover crops? And so, and I think there's a lot, I think mainly this comes down to like what questions, like what you want your cover crop to do. Because there's different combinations, there's different types, obviously, and I think that will lead to more, I think, a good discussion within this hour. I think, and so generally the background behind this research and why we think sort of the way we think is we know that these super diverse plants ecosystems are really good at what they do. Like this is from back home in Oklahoma. This is like these prairies, and you don't see anyone out there like putting fertilizer on a prairie. So I mean, these things are systems that maintain themselves over time, and we know that. And so it's sort of the idea that organic and sustainable agriculture initiatives are sort of starting to really hone in on is like, all right, how can we better replicate natural ecosystems and our ag ecosystems? Because we think about conventional agriculture, for example, it's monocultures, heavy outside input and overall deterioration of soil health over time if you're monoculturing one crop. They're also interested in sort of the microbes that are in the soil that sort of mediate these processes. Also, we know, if you have a legume like a clover or vetch or whatever, then there are microbes in the roots that that contribute to that nitrogen cycle in the soil, but they also suppress pathogens as well. And so we're trying to understand how can we better increase diversity within these ecosystems, specifically like your agricultural ecosystems. And so here's sort of where the scale of what I've been doing so far. I started with Ohelagu in 2019. That's the Oneida White Corn Co-op. And last summer, I was with Dan Cornelius. Despite COVID and everything, we still managed to get a field season in. And then we recently got a farmer rancher grant with Ohelagu and Minneconaugham. And looking at also use of reduced tillage practices like interseeding cover crops and roller crimping as well. Then also I'm looking for more ideas, collaborations with some other grants that I'm working on currently. So if you're interested, let me know. Yeah, so I think the most probably, I guess the interesting stuff came from when I was working with Dan Cornelius last summer. And so as I mentioned to the left here, these are all these different cover crop treatments we had with the corns. We had this winter wheat, we had this white clover, we had chicory and plantain mixture. This is often used for like pastures or like, when you're using grazing. And we just sort of combinations of those, just seeing what works, is the most diverse, having more cover crops do better, that suppress weeds more, or like just having one is that good enough. And we're using this calico corn and it's, fairly, already within itself pretty like diverse. And so that'll come into play later on. So we basically had this area that was not tilled before, and we tilled it up, we disked it up, and then we planted our corn, and then we had these little plots with just like these little treatments in there. So like in one little 10 by 12 foot square, there was corn, but there was also like wheat in between the rows as well, or clover, these combinations. And so generally what I found was we know that so this is looking at how many different cover crops you have in each of these little plots. So, you know, you can have none, zero, that's a control. You can have one cover crop like winter wheat or multiple. And so this is showing like if you just went in between a row, got a bunch of all the plants that was in the middle of the row, what proportion would be cover crop, what proportion would be weed. And we see that the more cover crops you have, generally the less weeds there are. And so that could be attributed to stuff like the fact that they're just better at competing with weeds, or maybe just like this putting in all that plant biomass in there and the seeding, putting in all those seeds can just, you know, weeds have no chance at all, like from the very beginning. And so to sort of like hone in more on that, we were looking at, we see each specific treatment now. And generally that chicory and plantain mixture probably did really well, because we look at 5 and 7 right here. And that's the clover and chicory plantain, and then all 3 of them actually. Generally, we saw really weak. The winter wheat and the alfalfa generally did really, really weak. And though generally we see the perennial cover crops do a lot better. And so this can sort of, you know, and again, this data really is dependent on sort of, you know, where you're at, what's your wheat pressure like, and, you know, sort of what you're looking for in a cover crop. I think at one point, me and Dan Crane were talking about him potentially like doing grazing at this field. So chicory and plantain would make sense. You have that clover in there also adding that, you know, nitrogen back to the soil. But generally, you know, it's just true in most like plant, you know, we see in natural ecosystems, the more plants you have in like the area, just generally like you will see more diversity, both like above ground and below ground in the soil as well. And that's sort of continuing on as well. So an interesting
Daniel?
point that we found. Yeah.
Before you move on, can you go back and just show us that graph again? Just so
Yeah,
to
of
make
course.
sure that we're understanding what you're showing. So you have the cover crop biomass per plot is on the left, and then your cover
Yeah.
crop combinations are listed out. And so you want higher cover crop biomass because then that is what suppresses your weeds, right?
Yeah, it's basically looking at proportion of cover crops to weeds, basically. So obviously, like if you look at 8, number 8 was just we hand weed number 8, like, and put no cover crops in there. So obviously it didn't have anything. But like 9, for example, was just like alfalfa, and did really, really crappy. And the proportion it had, like the rest of this percentage right here is just weeds, basically. It's just really bad. It didn't suppress weed. And so these higher mixtures, generally, if you like went in there, just took a sample, you'd see more cover crops by like 80% or so then.
Okay, so in your best case scenarios with numbers 5 and 7, you had 70% cover crop and then 30% weeds as the
Yeah,
biomass.
around.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's a ratio.
Yeah, it's basically the ratio. Yeah. We're like, yeah, I guess we thinking about just like all that plant biomass in there. Some of it's obviously weeds, and weeds do get in, but comparatively, it does better than other ones. Like, so.
Aaron
then,
was wondering what kind of clover you're using before you go any further.
Yeah, we use the white clover. That's white.
Yeah.
And so another interesting thing we found that so we're looking at yield, the deer and raccoon came in for a week and just took all the corn. So I had to think on the spot and sort of think what's the best way to proxy yield, like in really just like biomass and corn height. But that's the issue though, as many growers might know, that those indigenous corn varieties are, they can be one or the other. They look very different. So it's hard to interpret that generally, but we didn't see any drastic decreases in, like, you know, for example, if you had all 3 cover crops in a plot, it didn't really affect the corn too much from what we saw, what we can interpret from sort of what we see. There wasn't any like difference in height, or they weren't looking bigger or anything, which is also, I think, sort of potentially a good thing too, especially when we're dealing with these, you know, indigenous corn varieties that are already, you know, all over the place in how they look and how they can turn out. And so I think that's sort of the justification we had behind this a lot of times, was thinking that these indigenous corn varieties were generally better at competing and just hardier than, you know, conventional like wimpy corn that needs, you know, a lot of outside input and herbicide. And so and then looking at sort of cost, if you think about it, perennials, if you're putting those down, then more cost effective in a multi-year context, and as opposed to like those annuals you have to be putting in every year. And so then right now I'm currently going through the data and trying to see like, are we seeing an abundance of like microbial activity in each of these cover crops stimulating microbes in some way, because we know microbes can increase nutrients and also put carbon back in the soil. Then also we're looking at how each of these sort of cover crops affects soil health, and that's sort of a tricky one, is because we can look at it takes a while to see any sort of real significant changes in soil health, with over like multi-year. But I think I'm gonna start looking more at fluxes throughout the season, actually, so we can get a better idea of what's going on, what's contributing, because we know, they think now that microbes are really big in like carbon storage, actually, and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to look more at how these are. Yeah, as I mentioned, it sort of comes down to what you want from your cover crop. If you just want something that constantly cover, puts nitrogen back in the soil, then just like hume would work. But if you want to like increase that diversity in your ecosystem, then probably the multi cocktail mixture, as they call them, is probably like what you're looking for. And that's sort of it. I'll keep it short because I wanted to have all the conversation.
I'm muted. You did have a question come in the chat box.
I can't see that.
Oh, I'll read it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is full service. So Diane was wondering, would the clover chicory plantain mix work well between permanent corn beds?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Would the clover chicory plantain mix work well between permanent corn beds?
I would say so. I mean, like I said, this depends. And I think that's sort of where like there's so many different mixtures you can use, like so many different combinations, really. And I think the chicory and plantain was actually just like on the whim. I work for the organic extension agent for UW, so she was just saying, "Oh, let's try this," and so it actually turned out to be the best one. I think sort of maintaining like that broadleaf sort of, it's the best of both worlds, because you have these broadleaf little plants that can shade out and do really well against weeds. You also have that clover there that can add extra biomass and add that nitrogen back in. So I would say that if I had some sort of confidence in that combination, it would be that. I think that's what we're looking at in this coming Farmer Ranger Cerebrand with the co-ops too. Like stop sharing so I can actually see. Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. So his research is many years in the making, and there have been a lot of ups and downs in trying to integrate the cover crops into our fields, and a lot of extenuating circumstances that have kind of interrupted the flow of putting cover crops in. But essentially what we're trying to do, the main purpose of cover crops for us is to build organic matter in the soil, and that'll help us with the water infiltration rate, and it'll help us with a little bit with our flooding issues that we have in our fields. We have really low-lying fields. And then it also helps us return some nitrogen back into the soil, because we're growing corn. Corn is very nitrogen intensive, obviously. And so, like Daniel was saying, we're looking at a mixture now of cover crops instead of just doing one species that would go in with the corn. So if anybody else now wants to share kind of their experiences and how that has worked for them, the floor is open.
Sure, I'll jump in. This is Frank Kutka calling. I just want to mention that in a tilled situation, I have planted red clover after the last hoeing in corn and had very nice response to the clover growing into the fall. Weeds are pretty much done after that. And that was based on some work that Jane Mount Pleasant had done. So if you're tilling anyway and doing some sort of cultivation, you can plant, after the corn is hit about 2 feet tall, and get a pretty good response of whatever you want to plant. And the clover stays relatively short at first. It doesn't outcompete the corn, which is already fairly tall. And then that gets tilled back in, following spring. If you don't have timely rains, however, seeds planted in the summer won't grow. So there's the rub of that system.
Yeah, sort of on that, I heard from some corn people up here. I don't know if anyone else knows about this, but they said like white clover has like shallower roots and it may compete earlier on with like early stage corn, but red clover doesn't. So I think that sort of corroborates what Frank said. At least that's what Bill Tracy was talking about to me one time. So
yeah, I would love to see somebody do some research on the different species of clovers because yeah, some of them are quite competitive, especially the perennials. If you're not tilling, they're going to be there, and you know how you're going to slow them down so the corn could get established and find enough resources to grow well. I'd love to see more about it.
So I can share a little experience from Thor Oshner, who's an organic grower down by Ithaca, and just kind of reiterating what Frank said. Thor broadcasts annual ryegrass at his last cultivation. I think he's using, I'm not sure what type of cultivator, maybe a tine weeder or some sort of row cultivator. And that's at like, V4, V5, fairly early, knee-high corn. And that has worked well for him. And as far as the perennial cover crops, I do have some slides if you want to look at them a little bit later. I was using my push lawnmower to manage some cover crops between corn rows. And I guess with the perennial cover crop, I would want to mow the cover crop and throw it onto the corn row to suppress weeds in the row and to keep the soil covered as well. Because usually, corn really doesn't like competition. And when we talk about weeds, we don't want weeds to get taller than the corn, especially when it's in the seedling stage. And I would say that's going to be true for cover crops as well. We don't want those cover crops to get taller than the corn. So a couple articles I was reading, they found that a rototilled strip or a herbicide strip to reduce that competition in the row. And then if you had that weed-free strip and you mowed your perennial cover crop onto that weed-free strip, it might act like a little mulch to, keep it weed-free and to cover that soil. And covered soil, as you know, is very important for soil health as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that'd be interesting to go through those slides, maybe towards the end of the discussion, and just kind of look at what you were able to find. Trying to remember who else has played with cover crops on here.
Yeah, Nayatash mentioned rye in the chat box, but didn't specify how that was used exactly. I think it was Nayatash who said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, but it looks like it came with an emoji that doesn't look very good. So maybe it wasn't a great experience.
Nayatash, do you want to share kind of what you guys have going on with your cover? I'm not sure if you're muted. Yep. So with their farm, it's pretty small. It's just a couple acres. It was a farm back in the day, but it hasn't been farmed in a long time. And so they got a plan put together with NRCS. And one of the recommendations that they had was to put in a fall cover crop. And it sounds like they put in rye, but then it also sounds like this emoji was used. So maybe when
Hi, Leah. Can you hear me? This is Siobhan.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Hey, Siobhan.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Nayatash, but I know what she might have been referencing. We ran into a number of problems just getting the cover crop in. This is the first time we're using this area again, like Leah was just saying. And so there was the issue of clearing it, removing some waste items that people had been putting back there because it had been vacant so long. And then the weather got really funny with us. and then it would rain, and then the ground would be so soggy, and then we got like these pooling areas, and then we would try to fill it in with more topsoil and get the compost. And so it had just been a process, and then we finally got the rye down, but I think it might have been too far after the first frost, but then we saw like something was starting to like come, and then now, then it was just the weather again. So I think it was a learning process, and it almost felt like things were working against us, but we continue to persevere, and we're just looking forward to the adventure of it all, if you will. So that I think that's what the face palm emoji
Yeah.
was.
That's
So
a
we're,
great
we're giving
attitude.
it a good we're giving it a good shot. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's a great attitude to have. I think, especially when you're trying something new, it might not go the way you think it's gonna go. We've tried cover crops with our farm several times, and the first mistake we made in year one was we put in a hairy vetch, and we interseeded that, and that was really, really hard on the corn. It really competed with the corn, and it was really hard to kill. So we're not going to make that mistake again. And then in the following year, we did a clover mix interseeded with the corn, and that did pretty well. That did fine. And then the year after that, somebody came in and tilled up our area where that we were trying to do no-till experiment on. And so, or a low-till experiment on. And so we kind of got set back, and now we have a huge weed pressure issue in that area because the equipment they brought in had all these weed seeds on them. And so it's always, there's always something, it's always kind of adjusting to the new circumstances and kind of try to roll with the punches on it. But we are trying this year, our plan is to put in, we're testing the different cover crop species, like Daniel was saying, the different plots, and we'll be interseeding that. And then we're going to harvest the corn in the green corn stage. So we should be able to get it all harvested by early September. And that'll give us enough time to put in a fall cover crop so we're going to put in a rustic rye in the fall. So then when spring of 2022 comes around, we can come in with a roller crimper and, smash that rye down to the ground and try doing some seed drilling with our partners at Outagamie County of a seed drill, and try doing some no-till farming with our corn. So our challenge is that our corn likes at least 100 days to grow, which usually means we plant in around Mother's Day, and then we're harvesting sometime in October. So we're shifting the season a little bit and trying to plant a little bit later into that rustic rye, because you have to wait until the rye is mature enough before you can come in and roller crimp it down. So you have to wait till the stalk is nice and firm so that when you roll over it, it breaks. Otherwise, it'll just spring right back up when it's in its immature stage. So we're going to try all of that. We'll keep you guys posted on how all of that goes. But the year that it did work, when we did the clover mix, it really worked. That you can tell in our field where we've been putting cover crops because it's not as squishy, it doesn't get as wet. You can walk out there without getting your boot sucked off of your foot, and you can drive equipment in there. So we're seeing the difference already in just a couple of years of experimentation, the effect that it's had on the soil. So even though we haven't quite perfected it yet, we're still seeing some benefits of putting cover crops in. And so that's one thing I can say, is that it might not work perfectly right away, but if you work with an agronomist at the forefront or with someone in extension who has kind of knowledge of your specific lay of the land and what you're trying to grow, you can pick species that are going to work with your growing season, that are going to work with what you plan to do in the fall and kind of your whole year plan, so that you don't have to learn from the mistakes like we are over and over again. And hopefully with this new grant, we'll be able to really have some answers for you in the next couple of years on what's working for our corn. I assume a lot of us are growing indigenous flint corns. We're growing the Tuscarora white corn. I saw Dan mentioned that they were growing the calico corn. Are we all growing flint corns that are like about 100-day corn varieties?
I'm growing some that are shorter too, like as short as about a 70-75 day.
Mm. Okay. So Bear Island and Bay Mills, and then Jessica's growing 65-day flints. Oh, nice. So that would definitely
That's
be,
nice.
yeah, that's a great candidate for doing cover crops then, because you have that flexibility in the fall of when you can put your cover in. That's awesome. And the Bear Island, I see a couple people are growing. Do you guys know how many growing days that is?
It's between about 70 to, there's one strain that's like 115, but the standard is, is around that kind of 80, 85,
Okay.
maybe up
Great.
to 90.
Yeah, so that might be pushing it. But I don't think it means it's impossible depending on what you want to grow. So we're trying to accommodate with our Tuscarora flint corn and just harvest it in the green corn stage, which is about like around the 75-ish day mark, so that we can put the cover crop in for the next year. We can put the rye in for the next year. I know that's not always an option for people if you're growing for seed or if you really are growing to get the full mature corn so that you can dehydrate it or whatever you're going to end up doing with it. But that's one way that we're trying to get around it this year, just so we can try to get into having a no-till process. And we're going to be doing kind of rotating our fields in a way that allows us to do that. So the year that we put in the rye in one field, we'll be preparing the field next to it that fall for the next year. So we'll always have a field that's planted with corn into the rye, and then a field next to it that's ready for the corn to come into it next year, if that makes sense. So
And then how do you get your nitrogen for that cropping system?
So we're kind of we still buy a lot of fertilizer to put out there.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah. I was wondering more with the no-till planter too, because it starts to get more and more complicated to get the nitrogen to the crop.
Yeah. It might mean
If I-
planting. Go ahead, Frank.
Sorry, go ahead, finish what you were saying.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add a couple of basic biology things to this because figuring out cover crops and no-till is, of course, a fantastic puzzle. And so with corn, we do have a range of maturities I've seen corn mature in 60 days, and I've seen things that wouldn't do, less than 120. As you go across that range, you tend to also increase the height of the plants. And so as you go to those super early ones, they will be shorter plants generally, so they will be competing with weeds less. So your cover crop will really have to do its job. It's just what it will be. But interesting to see how it will work because the super early ones are scarcely 2.5 feet tall. And, you've seen taller corn, of course. The other thing I want to throw in there, since you're working with rye, is that if you have actual winter rye, that's a true winter variety, it has to have exposure to cold before it will start to bolt. And so I have seen guys who are doing like wheat variety trials and things actually put winter wheat or winter rye in between their plots that they plant in late spring, and the winter varieties will stay short, like 6 or 8 inches tall, all through the summer, and they won't go further than that. So I have heard of people broadcasting rye onto existing corn, even flying it on after the last cultivation and having it just fill in, and it should, if it's a true winter variety, just make a short lawn, if you will, in between the rows of corn.
I'd like to add again to what Frank is saying. The Soil and Water District did some work with flying on winter rye into corn in like early September. corn was tall and tasseled and, on its way to maturity. And the only place where the rye grew was in spots where the rows were far apart or there weren't any plants. And I think what I learned from that was, shade is a really big factor if you want your cover crop to grow. And the only time I would fly rye on in that situation would be when it's so wet that you can't get in there with a tractor or a spreader. And with open pollinated corns, sometimes they like a wide row spacing. And so that creates a good environment for getting sunlight into the row and using some cover crops.
Does anybody want to pitch an idea or talk about their specific circumstances and what they're interested in doing, and we can maybe brainstorm on what might work for them?
I actually just have a question about what Aaron was just saying. Excuse me, when he was talking about the rye for the cover crop, and actually it being best when it's wet and muddy like that to put it out there. So maybe what we did really wasn't a bad thing. We thought it was too much. It was too wet and muddy. So it's a possibility that it was still going to be okay.
It can be. So I think rye is a great cover crop to start using, for the first time. It's kind of like the most forgiving. You can actually just broadcast it out there, and if there's enough moisture, it'll grow. I saw a farmer try it with wheat because there was no rye seed around, and wheat just didn't cut it. But the thing is, the more management you put into it, the better it's going to come out. So if you can get that seed an inch to an inch and a quarter in the ground, that's your best situation because there's a little growing point there and it has to be protected from the winter. So if you broadcast your rye, it stays on top of the ground. If you have snow cover, if it germinates and you have snow cover right through the winter, you'll be okay. But if you have, exposed seed and it's cold and dry and windy, that growing point is going to get damaged. So if you can, if you can, the first option would be to drill it in. Then you can, the other options are to drill it and cultivate it in. Some farmers actually mix seed with their manure and broadcast it on their fields, and that can work. And if kind of like you're living right and all the forces are with you, you can just broadcast it out there, and some years that'll work as well.
Thank you.
If nobody had a specific question, I had a question for Daniel, actually. I'm really curious where you want this work to go in the future. What's coming next in this?
Question though. I think this sort of, it's tough because it's, field work, which is like a yearly, you get one shot, you get it wrong, then you gotta do it next year. So I think it's just more or less tracking the effects of these cover crops more on soil health and stuff like that, actually gauging like, okay, like, because I think we have this idea of, like there's like this one that can, suppress weeds, put nutrients in the soil, prevent erosion, like after corn, like we have this ideal sort of cover crop in our head, but I think it's really dependent on like what, we say like what situation you're in, it's dependent on that, where your farm is. So I think sort of I would like to like hone in more on like the specific factors that may, affect like why does it work, neither but not, down in southern Wisconsin, So I think sort of that just so we can sort of help specifically help more growers like with those issues, as opposed to like a one-all answer, like, oh, just try this mixture when, it's never really that easy. Like I think for this past experiment, it's more like, oh, okay, having these mixtures actually can something. If you have multiple of some type of cover crop, it actually could do some good against weeds at least. And so, and weeds the only thing we can really track on like a year-by-year basis. And so stuff like soil nutrients, stuff like that, we have to sort of monitor that over years to come. So it's more of a long waiting game at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, the question I had looking at your year one information was what weeds are going to come back after 5 years? Are you going to see the weeds changing? And is it going to get easier or harder? You know?
Yeah, that's always a question like I have too. Is like, like I think when we were having like this like that Sarah Grant discussion, like Leia, I think talking about the weeds, like the history of the weeds, when you even plant, when you even till, like all that can come into effect. And it's like, go from 0 to 100 in weed pressure if you like do the wrong thing or it rains one time. So yeah, I think to start honing in more on those outside factors outside the corn and cover crops, see how we can better, understand, what works well for you, in your corn variety too. That's another thing, like all these different corn varieties, different day lengths. You're going from 65 to, 100. It's there's a lot to work with there. So.
Thank you. So you'll be in grad school forever. Sorry, I should have said that. Not when you're in the middle of it. It'll be funny later.
With COVID and everything, I'm already been delayed a year or so. So it's gonna happen.
All right.
I'm very used to Wisconsin.
Aaron, did you want to share your slides before we hop off? Nope, you muted.
I have 8 or 9, so yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Let's see, I'm going to share my screen. If you can
Yep.
let me share.
Sure thing. Okay.
Okay. So if you feel like you've had some failures in cover crops, this will make you feel better because this little experiment I did at my farm, I've got about 40 acres of hay, and my neighbor comes and takes it, but I have one little end of a field where I grew some ladino clover. And so I had another neighbor come and just plant like a 300-foot strip, 6 rows of corn. And let's see here, I want to, okay, you can see my mouse better now, I hope. Mm-hmm. So we on May 21st last year, we planted 6 rows of corn about 300 feet long, and I just divided it up into plots. It was really dry. It's a clay soil, and there was very poor emergence because the furrows didn't close. We got a tiny bit of rain. Finally, on the 11th of June, we got a little more. So these are my treatments. I had some plots, so it's 6 rows wide by, I think they're about 20 or 30 feet long. So I sprayed the plots with glyphosate to kill all the weeds. And then the other treatment was just mowing the clover once. The third treatment was spraying an herbicide strip over the row. So there was maybe like a 10-inch band of weed free where the row was. And then the other treatment was mowing between the rows multiple times. Okay. So let's go down to the next. There we go. So this is my first mowing. See, I gotta, hold on. Here we go. Ooh. So this is my first mowing. So this is when we planted. You can see the rows. He planted it, then I brought out my mower and mowed the plots that need mowing, and then the other plots I sprayed with the glyphosate the day of planting. So it took a week or two, and this is what on the lower left, that's what the glyphosate plot looked like. Well, that's more than a week or two because those corn plants are up. That was June 9th. So then I came back and I used a weed whacker in this occasion to mow the clover between the rows. So in this row here, there's tiny little corn plants. This is the herbicide strip. Came back again and made it a little bit easier by using a push mower. So white clover really likes to flower. It comes back pretty quickly. And for the most part, there were just a few weeds in the clover, a couple curly dock, a little bit of foxtail, burdock or two. And so this is treatment 3, where the plants aren't really, this is the herbicide strip. The plants really are not wilted on June 9th, and the other treatments where I had the clover right around the corn plants, they were wilted and they had a hard time. So you can see where there was clover right around the plants, they just didn't have a chance. Where I had either herbicide strip or completely clean, the plants did much better. And I actually harvested a couple bags of ear corn from these plots. Some ears are actually pretty good size from the plots that didn't have the competition, where I had the clover right up to the plants. The ears were tiny. And then the other thing that I found really interesting is, so this, where you see my cursor here, is nut sedge, and it's growing right in the row, but just a couple inches away where there's clover, the nut sedge did not come up. And this is just the dino clover, type of white clover. It's not tall growing. So I'm curious, was it shading that would prevent nut sedge, from coming up, or was there some other interaction between, something going on in the soil with the roots that may have stopped nut sedge from coming up? Because I mean, ladino is not a really competitive plant. So like I said, I did actually harvest some ears of corn. I mean, hybrid corn is an amazing plant. It just grows even if there's a lot of stress. So some of the articles I read, you have to really eliminate early season competition with the herbicide strip or rototilt strip. Another study was saying how nitrogen is released from the clover leaves that die. Another study was suggesting 45-inch rows. And then, of course, corn variety, your plant density, competition from weeds or cover crop or living mulch, and rain are all going to affect, the outcomes of cover crops. So, and that's it.
Interesting.
So I'm going to try it again this year. Hopefully we'll get some rain and get some better results.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. Does anyone have any last minute thoughts on cover crops with corn? Or questions about kind of who to reach out to or how to learn more about cover crops?
How are people going to learn about what you're doing, Leah, and what you're doing, Daniel, in the future? How will they be able to hear about your results?
Well, we're planning on putting ours on our Ohilagu Facebook page. So we're at facebook.com/amongthecornstalks. And that's where we put all of our public information for our group. And I'll probably have another call, maybe another couple calls like this throughout the year, just to see where people are at. I'm really curious if any of you end up putting in a cover crop this year, please just let me know, because I'm really curious about what's working for people, what's not working for people. And I think it's a lot easier when we learn from each other. Dan, I see your hands up.
Well, yeah, I don't know if Daniel was going to jump in, but I did want to say that we've been in, Daniel and I have been in contact of, we're going to host, well, I'm going to be hosting, planning on 3 workshops at that field site where Daniel's got the research plot. And so I think we were talking probably for sure like the summer one, but possibly each of those workshops, depending on Daniel's schedule, that we would have a component on cover crops. Especially then you can see throughout the season of you know, just of the state of everything, you know, from the beginning, middle, and end of season.
Great. And those are going to be out at your farm here in Madison?
That's going to be at Silverwood County Park.
Okay.
I leased some land there, but yeah, it's in just south of Madison in southern Wisconsin.
Okay. Are you going to have a virtual component to that people can tune into?
Probably, yeah. Hopefully, I mean, as much in person as possible, but yeah, we're planning on having, I'm working on getting kind of a film crew there and documenting as much for people who can't make it, for sure.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I do need to hop off to another call. If you guys have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me or Crystal. I'll send this recording out to everybody so you'll have that. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully we can have more talks on this.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.